you all here in our favorite room of our favorite estate, and I'm very happy that we've finally organized this. It took us a lot of planning, a lot of conceptualizing of this Russian-French club that has been initiated by our French party, and we called it by the name understandable to every single Russian person, C'est la vie. This is our first meeting, and today we're talking about the global restructuring of the green restructuring of the global economy. And our discussion today, the discussion between Russian and French experts who will be joining us online. The discussion will be facilitated by us, Jean-Emmanuel Lafota, the organizer of the first Positive Economy Forum in Russia, ambassador of ESCP alumni in Russia, and founder of Very Champagne. And myself, Marina Novatnikova, a journalist from Arguments and Facts. Jean-Emmanuel. Good evening, all. Thank you for having me here today and being here. We have a great panel of speakers, both Russian and French, who are going to talk about green economy. I have already been in Russia for 14 years, and I'm working very hard on bringing our countries closer, especially in terms of economy. And I'm very grateful to Arguments and Facts, and especially Marina, for taking up this initiative. And I hope this is the first of many. And also the business schools that are taking part today. So the people listening to us from France. And I wanted to say that our topic, green economy, is growing very, very quickly. Today, the green agenda is a world trend, as well as the European Green Deal that has been approved by the European Union in 2019. It is a strategy of economic development aimed at reaching carbon neutrality by 2050. Well, we can say that for the Russian business community, ESG is on the one hand a new trend, and on the other hand it is something very well known to us, because our companies have always undertook social policy, and the green agenda, they just called it not green agenda, but environmental protection. But when the global standards arose, the companies began to restructure their business to fit into those new standards and to structure their business in line with the current trends. And there is even an ESG national alliance in Russia now. This is a platform created for the mutual discussion of the current issues in this area. And it is becoming more and more obvious that the European Union and Russia view the climate change agenda and the reasons behind the Green Deal differently. And Jean-Emmanuel is going to tell us a little bit about the European view on this. Thank you very much, Marina, on your opinion. And I wanted to say that France has long begun regulating the green agenda and the ESG, both for investors and for funds. And European regulators believe that this is going to make countries activate climate policy. And one of the arguments is the factor of making the European Union less dependent on the import of raw materials from just one country, to secure the supply chain, to make resource use more efficient, and to mitigate pollution. Well, from the point of view of Russia, as we know, and in the past couple months, this has been voiced by our president several times, the implementation of the Green Deal pursues economic and political goals. That is taking a position on the global market by clearing out space for new technologies. And this is achieved by reviewing the supplies of energy resources. So who is right? Which party? I think today, as part of the discussion, we're going to find out. So I am going to introduce the experts who are going to take part in our discussion. From Russia, they are Sergei Bobulov, head of the Center for Bioeconomics and Eco-Innovation at the Faculty of Economics, Moscow State University. He's head of Department of Environmental Economics and Doctor of Economics and Professor. He's joining us through Zoom. Timur Shakirov, he's also on Zoom. He's head of the Project Office for Modeling Industry Sectors and Enterprises of Moscow at Moscow Analytical Center. Roman Bilfand, who you all do know, he's the Scientific Director of the Hydrometeorological Center of Russia and Doctor of Technical Sciences, and Alexander Kisplov, Head of Department of Meteorology and Climatology at the Faculty of Geography, Moscow State University, Doctor of Geography Professor. And I am going to introduce the French speakers. They are Alexis Fijac. He's founder and managing director of Sustainability Fund. He used to be an economy advisor to the government of Germany. And right now he's working, and he's long been working on financing new technology for the green economy. We also have Damian Ricordo, founder and CEO at Fina Green Finance advisor. We also have Pauline Becky with us. She's managing director at Finance for Tomorrow by Europlus. Paris right now is the first finance market in the European Union for green economy. And Guillaume Allard, he's a professor of economics and environmental sciences at Paris Dauphine University and the Institute for Higher Research in Ecology. So these are our 8 speakers, and once you've heard them, you will know all about the future of the green economy. So we want this initiative to be a way for you to understand and know specific details about the green economy, because green economy is something that's happening today. I also want to thank Rado Company that helped us organize this event. This is a union of businesses. And I want Vasily Busakov to start this because we founded the first Positive Economy Forum together. So we can start, I believe. Yes, I would like to give the floor to the first Deputy of Director General of Arguments and Facts, Marina Mishunkina. She is the person whose enthusiasm led to implementing today's meeting of the club. Thank you, Marina. Thank you, Jean-Emmanuel. Thank you, all of today's speakers, all of the experts. And on behalf of Arguments and Facts Publishing House, I'm very happy to welcome you all here to our first Russian-French business club, C'est la vie. You know, for us, the very fact of this meeting is symbolic, because the green agenda is something Arguments and Facts has paid a lot of attention to, not just because it is a world trend, not just because it is a necessity, but we humans are part of nature that surrounds us. So if nature is irrevocably damaged, we will not be able to continue living on this planet. And the section ecology is a permanent section of Arguments and Facts, and this is one of the most popular newspapers in Russia, and you can see it on your tables before you. So the section on ecology is one of the most popular with our readers. We share successful experiences in environment and ecology. We educate our readers and promote environmentally friendly habits. We also implement a number of environment-related projects. With Rosneft, we have organized an infrastructure that is required for tourism on a relict lake. But we actually saved the lake because the natural characteristics of the lake are comparable to the most healthy seas and lakes of the world. And we also inspired our readers so much, but our first very simple initiative, so that it developed into a whole green movement. So the green agenda is very natural, not just for our journalists, but also for all of the citizens of our country. Since we've been school children, we've been taught to take care of nature. Environmental education has long become the standard for families and schools. And I believe that this is a huge impact on the way people behave in their businesses. And we as journalists are talking examples of this. And one of our partner companies working in the northern areas asked its employers to help the reindeer by providing them with food after the snow had been covered with a nice crust, so that the reindeer could die because they could not reach the moss under the snow. This is not all. We equip pathways for the animals, and it is part of our social normal behavior. So there's the question, why, if we're so respectful to nature in our country, why does global climate change agenda find so little support? I think that this happens because we often see that this turns into political slogans and unachievable goals. And our president, Marina Nabatnikova, already mentioned this when speaking at the Valdai Forum in October, paid the attention of our Western colleagues to the fact that our energy balance in Russia is actually more green than in many of the industrially developed countries. Why is it so? Because by 76% of the energy balance is constituted by nuclear energy. that has almost no waste and no emission, and also hydro regeneration, gas and renewable energy sources. And if you compare it to the USA, it's 77% and 64% in Germany. And if we look at the large Asian countries, the percentage there is even smaller. Of course, Russia is a leader and a donor in the green agenda and green energy. However, we realize that there are still a lot of issues. And there's a lot that we all together need to do. We keep cleaning up our air, water bodies, and land. And I'm very happy that today, here in this room and online on our screens, we see not politicians, but people from the business community, people from the research community, the people who do not shout out slogans, but actually do real work. And I believe that this is very important and very valuable. And it is very important to hear the opinions of those experts if we really very seriously want to understand the green agenda. And we've heard enough from politicians already. Thank you, Marina. Well, we are going to hear one politician, the one that we've mentioned today, twice already. So we've created a selection from President Putin's talk at Russia's Calling Forum held by VTB Bank, and he was speaking to foreign investors. And a month before that, he took part in the Valdai Forum, where he spoke to the Western public, and here he is talking to investors. Dear colleagues, we are aware what the trends of global development are and what the baseline criteria today for the investment flows are. And this ESG parameter, which is an aggregated indicator, it demonstrates what the strategy of a country in its development in the mid to long run is. And it should be and is people-centric, human-centric. The Russian Federation is aware of that. Not just because we want to follow this global trend, but because we build all of our policy around people. We're trying to do so anyway. We're not always successful, but this is our resolve and our determination. And what does this mean? This means that the healthcare level and quality should go up. We should care for the natural environment. If we talk about carbon neutrality and attaining it by 2060, that means that we will be consistent and moving towards that goal step by step. It may sound a modest goal. Many countries are more ambitious, much more ambitious. But I can say that probably we can attain that within a shorter timeline if we go as planned. And definitely we have a toolkit in place in order to reduce the carbon intensity of our economy, to use the sinking capacity of our forests and ecosystems in general. And this means that we need to take care of them. We should fight forest fires, plant new forests if they're eliminated, where they are eliminated, and so on and so forth. And definitely all of these things, including modernizing our economy and going digital. And all of that allows us to say that we fully support the Sustainable Development Criteria formulated by the United Nations. And we are a very active participant of working with other countries on that. And I'm confident that our investors will see that. And if they take part in our efforts, they will be also following the trend of today. So developing alternative energy sources and hydro energy will be something that humanity expects from all of us, from official governments and from investors that participate in the global economic development. So we are speaking the same language and we can very well understand each other. Mr. President, may I ask a personal question on the same topic? Yesterday, the Soviet Russian newspaper published a study by Credit Suisse. And the insight was as follows. There are enterprises, economic actors, and so on, but there are also people, individuals. And to fit into the 2.9 tons, which is the norm of the Paris Agreement, a person of the future should give up meat, coffee, beer, they can use sports equipment at the gym only 3 times a week for 30 minutes and fly a plane only once a year. But the worst part is the personal hygiene. You can take a shower only 3 times a week, 8 minutes, and you can flush the toilet only twice a week. The washing machine and the dishwashing machine can also be operated only twice a week. So would you like to live in this kind of world? Would you like to live this kind of life? I would like to live in such a world where the personal hygiene items would not be detrimental to the environment. I would like to fly planes that would not be polluting the atmosphere. If we use any foods, they should be properly supplied and utilized afterwards. We can attain and accomplish anything in balanced ways, not in a formalistic way. We should not try to justify that we cannot attain something. We should strive for good results.
All right, this is just a comment, and let me draw your attention to the fact that if before that our president was talking about carbon-free generation in the energy industry, meaning nuclear, hydro, and other alternative sources of power. This time he also mentioned hydrogen, and that's a really serious area that we are developing in Russia today. Let's listen to some more quotes from the, oh, that's it, okay. Our I have to mention that our revenues from non-oil and gas revenues are increasing, and we intend to follow this track to plan for the post-oil era, and we are going to diversify our economy. This is a topic for a separate discussion, and we are going to follow this. Also, the population of the planet is growing. It will continue to grow, and the global economy is growing, and it will continue to grow. The energy demands, guess what, are growing, and the demand for energy will be higher than it is today. It is difficult to forecast and foretell what the structure of the global energy mix will look like in several years. Assessments vary. International Energy Agency, for instance, believes that over the next 20 to 30 years, the global energy mix will only change slightly, and there will be no complete phasing out of the fossil fuels. And of course, we bear these arguments in mind, and our basic premise is that our deposits of hydrocarbons, including oil, might be used for a variety of needs, not just for the fuel sector, but also for the chemical industry, which will also bring more income into the state coffers. Then the existing oil and gas infrastructure can be used for hydrogen supplies. All right, we listened to our country's president, and now let's move on to the expert discussion of this problem. Let me point out the fact that it's not Greta Thunberg, as opposed to Glasgow. It's not Greta Thunberg who is going to be presenting, but rather real scientists who will present a scientific approach to the problem. Let me ask Alexander Kislov this question. They try to scare us that the global warming is really fast, and we know that in the history of our planet, there was the ice age and actually several ice ages. It would only be logical to ask a question whether it's due to man-made factors or the Earth has its own special cycles. It keeps on doing what it was designed to do, and how much more time do we have before the disaster, and what's going on actually. If I may also show my presentation, I hope it's possible to use my presentation, but I did prepare one. Will you be able to help me with that? All right, so far, let me just say that icing, I mean, human beings have nothing to do with this global, huge global cycles. All right, the problem that we are discussing here today has some political content and the scientific content, because climate does exist and it's changing. Just let me tell you just a few words about these climate changes to present them to you briefly. And what I'm going to talk about is not my personal point of view. I just speak on behalf of the scientific community, global scientific community. I will be using the results of not just my individual efforts, even though they are in there, but the overall stand of the climate scientists today. Please help me with my very first slide, and let's start with that. I know you need some time to digest this information. You are getting ready for the climate change. It's a serious matter. While we are waiting, okay, I can start, but there's this Greek term, oxymoron, and climate is a great example of that term. It combines rather controversial notions. So on the one hand, we all understand that climate is something stable, typical, that exists continuously, but at the same time, climate has a lot to do with changes. So that's a rather controversial definition. In this slide, I'm showing the climate changes that take place now at the same time. As you can see by those arrows pointing in different directions, many things are happening at the same time. If you ask me whether we're talking about global warming or whether it's getting colder, it's both at the same time. If we're talking about millions of years, and especially if we talk about dozens of years, it's warming. But since human beings live in generations and dozens of years, one or two generations, we perceive the today's changes as global warming. In this graph, we show some temperature anomalies, and the climate is getting warmer, that's for sure. Let me show you another slide. Here, it's all about the causes of this global warming. We look at what they call forcings and all those external factors, the sun radiation, which does not change. Here are the changes in the last couple of centuries, no changes here. And there are some greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Their concentration is growing. These are direct measurement data. And these are not just words. There's evidence to that, and the mathematical modeling shows us that this change is based on the growth of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, which are basically man-made. Now let's see the next slide, and here we show you an interesting fact. It's all about burning. This is the growth of CO2 emissions, and this is the reduction in the concentration of oxygen in the atmosphere. If we are talking about burning, then you naturally burn oxygen or consume oxygen. Of course, we still have enough oxygen because in absolute numbers, the changes are not that significant. In the worst case scenario, by the end of the century, we will have a reduction by 0.1%. Here we showed a variety of different signs of global warming. It's not really that much. You might think 1 degree, but it does change the environment. You have glaciers that are melting, Greenland that's melting. You have the increase in the global ocean level because you add the water that was kept in the glaciers and you get the increase of the water level in the oceans. And it also expands as any body that is heated. And you get the reduction of the ice area in the northern polar ocean. And one more slide about the climate forecasts or predictions presented in the report. And these are the results that we got depending on how the economy will be developing. We will have this temperature or that temperature, and this is how the ocean level will be growing. This is how the ice will be melting all the way to zero. Many of you have seen these curves, but let me point out the following fact. They all originate in one point and they go in one bundle, but each one of those curves is connected with considerable uncertainty. They go in one bundle until the middle of the century. It means that there are different scenarios, but all the curves are here together. It means that no matter what we do with our emissions, we will still have that warming going on, but only from the middle of the century, there will be some divergence of those curves. In the next slide, we show this more generalized view. We have the growth of CO2 emissions, and it leads to increase of temperature. And there's this bifurcation point, and no one can know for sure. It's a major leap up or down, and that in the past, it led to the demise of civilizations. Like one of civilizations died because of the increase in the intensity of storms. And are we approaching that kind of bifurcation? It's a mystery. Most probably not. But anyway, in the next slide, we will talk about fighting those climate changes. They're all recognized as something serious, and now everyone is talking about the carbon neutrality, and it's a problem for Russia. It's connected with major problems for Russia and the ambitious plans that have been adopted in the world, how everyone's promising to switch to carbon neutrality by the middle of the century. For Russia, judging by those curves, it would mean a serious hit at our economy. Belgiev, the president's advisor on climate change, is talking about avoiding turning climate into politics, but this is what is happening actually. That's a dangerous thing. A carbon border adjustment mechanism in the EU. This carbon tax mechanism, which is being launched to deal with carbon footprint for the products that are crossing the borders of the Russian Federation, and that will really hurt Russia. And thank you very much for your attention. That's the end of my brief presentation. Thank you, Alexander. And now let's give the floor to a French expert. Our next expert is Alexander Figeac. I hope you can hear me.
I can, thank you.
Good evening from Moscow. Thank you, Alexander, for being with us. I know you're joining us from Berlin. You have a great experience of working in different countries with innovations, and using your foundation, you've been financing green innovations. What could you tell us about this question? Why sustainability is so important?
Okay. I also have some slides, if I may share my screen.
Yes, of course.
Okay. So I mean, as the professor explained, you know, sustainability is an issue for us all because we're all faced with climate change, and the great challenge for us all is to decouple our economic growth with the impact on the planet. And you know, many elements of the biosphere are being impacted. You know, from the oceans, fresh water, to obviously our forests, our land. And in particular, biodiversity. You know, the pollinators, for example, we have had a loss of the bee of around 30% in Europe in the past 5 years. And bees, obviously, as pollinators, they deliver a huge ecosystem service for free. And in fact, other countries are also facing this issue. In China, for example, there are sorry, perhaps I need to stop the translation on my side, correct?
Perhaps you need to choose the English channel. Maybe that's why you get the echo.
Okay. So hold on just a second.
At the bottom, there's this globe, and you choose the English track.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you very much for your slides and for your very interesting words about innovation. And we can see that green economy means innovation and that it is profitable. We're moving on to our next speaker, Mr. Vilfond. So to continue, I would just like to make a small remark, because our previous speaker spoke about waste processing, and in the latest issue of Arguments and Facts, we published a whole page about this. And it was called "There's No Waste, There's Material." And our call center conducts a survey with our readers about which articles were the most popular with our readers. And that was one of the top 10 most read articles. So our readers voted for the green agenda. And now I would like to ask Roman, what is your opinion on what is going on the change that you keep track of all the time? And we hear very scary things from you about anomalous snowfall, about anomalous rainfall expected in Moscow tomorrow. But we understand that in reality, in fact, there's wildfires, there's floods. Is this somehow related to climate change? Or do those disasters have a different origin? And what is your opinion on the anthropogenic factor and its impact? Thank you very much, Marina. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm very happy to see you all here. First, I would like to comment on what you said about the scariness of what I normally say. Well, honestly, and people from meteorological organizations are very careful about weather forecasting. And you can never hear things like snow apocalypse or unbelievable rainfall, because there is a great number of commercial meteorological organizations that do say those words. And for journalists, it's like honey to flies. They're very, very catchy phrases. But you have to trust me. It's not us who say those things. So we normally just shrug our shoulders and take this kind of phrasing very, very ironically. Professor Kislov told us that climate is a very complex concept. Climate is a Greek word which means an incline of sun rays. The lower the angle between the land surface and the sun rays, the colder it is, and this is very natural. However, climate is changing. It is not a stable system where everything depends just on the sun ray angle. So I'm going to continue Alexander's talk, actually. So when did climate change drastically? Paleoclimatologists and geologists talk about the Vienna period. The Earth is about 4.5 billion years. Sometime around 500,000 years, 1/10,000th part of today's volume of oxygen in the air that we have today, and that is a lot. That's 28% of the atmosphere. So this is the point of Pasteur, when this low amount of oxygen made it possible to form the ozone layer. Of course, there is anaerobic life, but the ozone layer is the protection of everything that's alive on Earth. And this small amount of ozone was enough, of oxygen was enough. So what other processes like that can happen in the atmosphere, we don't know. However, today atmosphere is regenerated in models, in atmospheric models, and this is a huge scientific achievement. When it is possible to produce an adequate description of the climate dynamics and to trace the dependencies. So ideally, we would like to have two atmospheres, one with people and one without people. And then we would be able to answer the question of the role of humans' influence on the climate. However, the scientific models make it possible for us to give the answer to this question. So the dynamic change of the climate model makes it possible to say what is the degree of the change. So Alexander already mentioned IPCC. It was founded by 2 UN organizations. And this panel, they really are pioneers, employing leading experts, leading climatologists from the United States, Poland, Russia, China, all countries. And of course, the political structure in all of these countries is different. However, the decision taken by this panel is mutual. It's hard to imagine another working group like that. So this panel assesses the experiments and the scientific articles that are being published. And they provide reliable data on the impact on anthropogenic impact. And it shows that the impact of people into the global warming is a lot more significant than that of all other factors, of all possible factors. So that is the answer. You've already said that climate is a scientific structure and real scientists work on that, but also it is a subject of political discussion, and it's very much political. And all of the decisions are made by politicians and economists. And I'd say that's actually good, because without politicians, the Paris Agreement would not have been possible. And it would not have been possible to reach a common understanding. I think it is a unique example where all political leaders made the decision that it was necessary to transition to this new life, that we need to create the conditions that would become obstacles to the global warming, especially to greenhouse gas emissions. I think this is absolutely amazing. I love history. Maybe historians will tell me that this happened sometime again, but I can't remember this happening ever again. So when a decision like that is being made, have to create the conditions. to achieve those goals. Well, at first it was supposed to be done by the end of the 20th century, but despite all of those agreements being signed, the global warming is still going on. So the countries are undertaking an extra responsibilities that would speed up those processes, that would preclude the increase in the concentration of greenhouse gas. Net zero, for example. And I think it is very important that the politicians and the economists reach the same type of consensus as scientists do. So we need to prevent global warming. But there are also political interests in every country. And there is an ongoing discussion. So, for example, in our country, there are 25% of the world's boreal forests, and of course, they are a carbon sink. And then people say, you don't manage your forests, and there's this whole concept of managing forests, carbon footprint. So we need innovative behavior, innovative ideas, like what the scientists have when they reach the consensus. So we need the consensus to reach those goals. And I would like to conclude by pointing your attention to the fact that there is a lot of intent in terms of green economy, energy efficiency, and so on. However, we don't have enough research about climate. We need to invest into science. This is not a loss, this is an investment, and it's going to pay back. The more we know about the dynamics of climate change, the better the decisions we're going to make. If this is done by governments and humanity in general. And those trends are already known to us, creating observation networks, scientific experiments, supercomputers that make it possible for us to solve fantastic, unheard of before problems, where we can assess the interconnection of various processes of different scales. So I believe the future of climatology and meteorology is in those more adequate decisions.
Thanks a lot. I was listening to you and I recalled how back when Germany was just switching to their wind parks and the alternative energy, there was this international conference and I spoke with Germany's Minister of Energy, and we asked this person a question whether it was well calculated or not, but all we heard were political slogans and nothing else. We do support you in the sense that we need to be investing in science. We need to understand what's going on before we know what shall be done. And now let's take a look at the table that was prepared by the Global Resource Institution. This is a global non-commercial organization founded in 1982 with the financial support of MacArthur Foundation, led by James Gustus Pett. It's working in 7 areas: food, forest, water, energy, climate, ocean. I wonder if we can increase this slide. All right. If not, that's fine. If you are online and if you joined us on Zoom, you can take a closer look and look at the left-hand side, because On the left, we show the percentage of global greenhouse gas emissions per country, and on the right-hand side, these are emissions per capita, and it doesn't give you much to assess the real contribution of every country. Better take a look at the left-hand side, and we need to move on with our discussion. Thanks a lot, Mr. Vilfant, for this great presentation. We're moving to the financial part, and we have Damian Ricardo with us. I hope you can hear us.
Yes, I'm currently here.
I think you are in Madrid right now, and
yes,
you took part in the first one of the first economic forums here in Russia. You know the country. My first question to you is as follows. You used to work for the Rothschild Bank, and then you created Fina Green to finance new sources of energy. Can you tell us more about your activities to finance this new energy transition?
yes, sure. Let me share my my screen with you as well, just to give you a bit some visibility on what we are doing. 2 seconds, please. Okay, so it should be okay now. No. Yes. I think this is fine. So on our side, Fina Green, we are an investment bank dedicated to the energy transition. So we cover all over the world, and mainly Europe and emerging countries. And finally, what we have done is to finally to raise funds and to make transactions in the renewable energy market. And we have since inception, we have closed more than 3 billion euro of transaction in the renewable energy market, which represent 150 transactions. So I would say we have a good view on what are the investments, I would say, in the world in the energy transition. So it was for the, yeah, please, Emmanuel.
То ви финансирате нови енергии и что ви можете нам сказать о разроде
Tell us about the climate. Do we need more investments to make sure that we do this right?
Yeah, on that thing is, you know, we could think that finally, okay, we have a global warming, it's fine, and it's okay. There is not so much consequences. And when we look at that, and it's a huge impact, not only on the global warming, but also in terms of economics for the world, because economics estimate that now the damage for the global warming, it's about 1,700 billion a year by 2025. It's a huge amount. So meaning all this impact of the global warming. So it represents more or less 37% of our global GDP by the end of the century. So it's a huge thing, and even if we are looking for, I would say, countries who are not so much resources, emerging countries. So they will need between 300 billion and 500 billion just to mitigate the impact of global warming in their countries. So, meaning if we don't do nothing, so it will be more, it will be worse than paying for that. So this is why we have to act and to make a lot of investment to fight against climate change.
Instrument my możemy использовать dla этого?
What kind of instruments can we use for that?
So you have, I would say, two kinds of instruments that we can use. So first of all, finally, you have public policies. And the public policies, you know that nowadays you have the world with the different COPs. They are trying to take commitments to fight against climate change. What kind of commitments? So just in fact, just to take also a sum up of what was given at COP26, you have now 90% of the world economy who is now covered, and we are targeting a net zero target. So try to avoid to compensate every emission of carbon so that is a really good news. And then in terms of purely financing impact, we know that during COP15, a fund of 100 billion a year should be set up by 2020. We are a bit late on that objective. Now the objective should be achieved by 2023. But as I mentioned before, it's not enough, because 100 billion a year, it's not the 1,700 billion that I was mentioning just before. So we are far away from what we need in terms of finance. And also one last point regarding public policy, we have now several countries, 20 to be exact, that say will not more finance fossil energy abroad by 2023. So it's quite a huge commitment from US, UK, these kind of countries who make this commitment to not finance anymore fossil fuel. So this is great news, but it's public policy and it's not enough commitment in terms of financing. That's why we need the private sectors to move on that. And I give you kind of tools that are really interesting in terms of private sectors given that. So I think you all have known about green bonds. So it's this kind of magic word we have on the world to try to save the planet. And you can see that in the space of 6 years, we have raised more than $1 trillion of dollar to fight climate change. So it's quite huge amounts. So you see that this kind of emission works well as a tool to finance the green economy. And on this slide, you can see that I would say that the top 3 countries working on that are, one is US, obviously, and the 2 other one are France and Germany, who are, I would say, the top 3 countries emitting green bonds to fight against climate change. And the other tool, which is quite interesting, I would say this is investment in infra, in assets which produce renewable energy. So you can see on that graph, and it's quite impressive, that nowadays you have 500 billion a year invested in new renewable energy projects. So between renewable energy, between hydrogen, and also a lot of things like electrification, transport, or heat, we can, I would say, make, I would say, the world better. So it's quite a great news. And you have the same scheme as previously. I put that in terms of countries, and you can see that typically China is investing the most in renewable energy assets in the world as of today, and they are the first one, but in large advance with the other one. So US, Germany, and Japan, and then UK and France. So you see that it's not only, I would say, fighting climate change. It's not only a job for Western countries. It's a concern for everybody, including as well countries like China, which is the first producer and first installer of PV plants and wind plants in the world, which represent PV plants and wind plants represent more or less 90% of the new renewable energy capacity in the world. And I would say, as a way to conclude my small speech, I would like to present you this small graph because it's quite interesting. As you see on the picture, there is no planet B for sure. And what is good, you have two curves on the graph. So you have this blue one and the purple one. The purple one is, I would say, it's an index of I would say oil and gas companies, and you can see that this index is just divided by two over a year in 2020. So I think this is not a moment to invest in fossil companies, oil and gas company. And the other index is based, I would say, on all renewable energy companies. And you can see you have in 1 year, these companies have just made 2.5 times their value at the beginning of the year. So now, if you have to bet to something and to invest in something, you know where you have to put your money. And I think this is really important to know that because each one we are also putting a bit of money on stock exchange and so on. So you know now where you need to invest. So thank you, everyone.
Объем финансирования, особенно видим, как это увеличит
considerable financing allocated to these projects. And now we need to move on to our next speaker. And he will join us online. This is Timur Shakirov. I hope he's with us. Damian Recorder just mentioned the green bonds that they issue in the US and a number of European countries, but Moscow also has some. Tell us why our capital needs them and what kind of mechanism you're using. Also, a few words about the interests we are witnessing towards green investments. Thanks for this question. We're talking about climate change and environment preservation and the events to implement best available technologies to reduce CO2 emission, but we also need sources of financing to implement all those projects, both public and private money. Let me show you the presentation. On how these events are financed globally and in Russia. Some of the colleagues already mentioned the importance of green bonds, and we were shown the stats for the world. As we can see, over the previous 2.5 years, they emitted $900 billion worth of green bonds. More than 2/3 of all issuances of green bonds were allocated, and that's a new serious trend that sustainable development bonds, green bonds, are issued by both corporate and public issuers, as Alexis and other colleagues mentioned. Here, it's mostly about financing environmental activities, again, financing the renewables, improving energy efficiency, developing clean transport. If we talk about the Russian situation, here at the Moscow stock exchange, there's the sustainable development sector for green and social bonds. In 2021, we made a breakthrough because this year the issuance of green bonds grew compared to the previous year fivefold. Earlier in the year, the amount was 28 billion. In 11 months of 2021, we reached the amount of 155 billion. The government of Moscow and the city of Moscow actually started the trend that we're witnessing now. In spring this year, the city allocated 70 billion worth of green bonds to finance transportation projects. And after this major issuance, the sustainable development segment began to grow, and now we reached this total volume of 155 billion, mostly to finance green activities. 87% of all those issuances that were placed in the Moscow Stock Exchange were there to finance environmental projects. If we talk about our particular project, in spring this year, we were the first public issuer that issued green bonds here in Russia to meet both Russian and international requirements. We are the first Russian Federation entity that went through all the stages, starting from issuance documentation all the way to the documents that were checked by the verifier and were accepted by the Global Association of Capital Markets and were added to the database of green bonds. We were the first issuer whose bonds were added to the sustainable development segment of the Moscow Exchange. To attract foreign investors, we added these bonds to the information part of Luxembourg Stock Exchange, which is the key exchange trading in green bonds from different issuers from a variety of countries. Marina, going back to a question about whether it made sense to issue those bonds. For us, it's not just how we finance environmental projects by green bonds, and those investors who get our bonds, they know what we are doing, and then we report to them. It's also about the environmental, economic message, why we cared about specifically green bonds. And we placed 70 billion rubles worth of bonds. This is the largest issuance for Russia. And the demand for our bonds was 1.2 times greater than the offer. And we were able to use the rate of 7.38, the coupon rate, which is 10 or 20 percentage points lower than the expectations the market players had. And that allowed us to save budget funds anywhere from 500 million to 1 billion rubles. It makes total sense economically because you save the budget funding that otherwise you'd have to use to service the debt. And using those bonds, we finance our key transport projects. We procured 400 electric buses using the funding that we borrowed from the investors. Another key project is building the Greater Circle Line. Today, the city mayor actually opened 10 stations of that new Circle Line, and it was financed thanks to the bonds that were placed in spring this year. And it will be the largest circle metro line in the world when it's finished. And both of those projects will help us reduce the CO2 emissions and improve the environmental situation. Within this framework of a green bonds project, we also took obligations to publish reports on how we use the money that we raised, how much we were able to reduce CO2 emissions thanks to the implementation of our projects. And we will prepare our first report in April next year. And anyone who invested in these bonds will be able to see the results that the city got, what kind of projects we implemented, and why we actually made that issuance. Thanks a lot, Timur.
You've explained the way green bonds work very well, and I believe we have no questions about the feasibility of this project. So let us move on with our program. Thank you, Timur. This was very interesting. As specific information about how the city of Moscow uses green financing for innovations and for the city. And now we're moving over to Paris, where we have Pauline Bicky. Can you hear us?
Yes, perfectly.
Thank you for joining us today. You're doing very important work as a managing director of Finance for Tomorrow. And it's very important for the Paris financial market and the European Union. The first question: what financial opportunities are there for the green economy? So what are the financial needs?
Yes, I will also share my screen. I hope you can see it. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it's all right.
Okay, perfect. So maybe just before answering your question, thank you for the invitation. First, I'm very happy to be here, and I would like to present what is Finance for Tomorrow and what is the role of our organization. So we are a branch of Paris Europlace. We gather all the actors of the financial ecosystem with the aim to promote sustainable finance and to transform the current practices of finance to finance green economy and the transition towards the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Objectives. So really our aim is to make the Paris Financial Center a key, a hub of reference on sustainable finance. And to that, we gather all the actors of the ecosystem, not only financial actors, or we have nearly then 90 members. Almost half of them are financial actors like banks, insurers, asset manager, private equity societies, etc. But we also have the public authorities around the table, NGOs, think tanks, companies, extra, because the idea is really that we need to work all together to transform the way we do finance and the way we finance the economy to go towards a more sustainable system. So to answer your question about the financing needs, even if Damian already talked a lot about the financing needs, but first of all, to finance the Sustainable Development Goals, the OECD estimated before COVID crisis the financing gap corresponding to be around $2.5 trillion per year. Because the global needs for financing SDG is around 5,000 billion dollars. So we see that we have half of these needs that are not financed today. The European Commission also explains that to reach its climate objectives, it will need more than 350 million euros per year, and on that amount, there is an investment gap from public finance of 180 billion to achieve EU climate and energy targets by 2030. So we see that the public finance cannot do alone, and the private finance sector needs to finance this economy and this transition towards the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. Other maybe financing needs to illustrate regarding sustainable infrastructure, we need more than $90,000 billion during 15 years. This is data from New Climate Economy. Regarding biodiversity protection, we need $300 billion of investment per year. This is data from the United Nations. And regarding energy transition, the International Energy Agency estimates the needs to $1,000 billion of investment per year. So really the private financial sector need to mobilize because to reach the international objectives, we need more financing.
Финансирование. Скажите нам, пожалуйста, что Париж...
Can you tell us about the Paris financial market and what it's doing to meet those needs?
Yes, so as I said, with Finance for Tomorrow, we gather all the financial actors of the ecosystems, and we have several working groups. So I will come back, yes, to this presentation. We work on several streams to help the actors to finance those needs. First, we have a platform to produce expertise and help the financial actors towards methodologies, because it's not very easy to calculate how a portfolio, an investment portfolio, is aligned with the Paris Agreement, for instance. What does that mean? How can we calculate the alignment of an investment portfolio with 1.5 degree scenario or 2 degree scenario? So we share expertise and methodologies among our members on such topics. We are also working on impact finance, for instance, because we believe we should not stop at just integrated environmental, social, and governance criteria in the investment decision. Investors should also have the intention to transform the real economy. And so we need to develop what we call impact finance with the aim to transform the real economy. We are working in this working group also on biodiversity, such as climate. What does that mean to align a portfolio with the international biodiversity objectives, etc. We to make this ecosystem really dynamic and alive, we organized several events each year, and we have one big event which is called the Climate Finance Day. We organize it each year in Paris just before the COP. It is really a way for all the financial actors of the Paris Financial Center to take a step back and see what have been done the year before, and also to make new commitments towards sustainable finance. We also work internationally within the Financial Center for Sustainability, which is a UN network of green financial center with the aim to promote sustainable finance. And finally, we develop a sustainable finance observatory, which was really a new thing when we launched it in 2019. There is no equivalent worldwide. The idea is to measure and to track the commitments of French financial actors and to measure the transformation of the financial flows. So it's a website where we can find for each financial actors what are the commitments, but we do not stop at just commitments for net zero, for instance. We also provide information on the monitoring of these commitments when a bank or an insurer said it will be neutral by, it will contribute to carbon neutrality by 2050. How does he provide information? What information does he provide to prove it's not just a commitment, it's not just a disclosure, but a real action. And also we collect data from our financial markets on green investment, on coal exposure. We would like to also do it for fossil fuel exposure in the next year. So the idea is really to show how the financial flow are transforming to finance the Paris Agreement objectives and the Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you, Pauline, for this information about what Paris is doing in the finance area. This is a huge challenge. And maybe there is some synergy with the Moscow financial market. And right now, we are moving on and giving the floor to our next speaker, Sergei Bobolov. Thank you very much to all of our speakers, but I suggest to take a look at economics. And our speakers have mentioned several times that the green agenda is going to require significant changes in the industrial sector. And we have Sergei Bobolov with us. And he's head of the Department of Environmental Resources at the Economics Faculty at Moscow State University. Can you hear us? Can you hear me? Well, can you tell us, right now, it's obvious already what change and what restructuring in the industrial sector is required in order to transition to the green agenda? And is global industry and Russian industry ready for this change? This is a wonderful question that I'm afraid I'm going to give a very pessimistic answer to. But first, I would like to take over from my French colleagues. Alexis, I think when we talk about the green economy, when we only talk about the carbon neutrality, this is narrowing the topic. And I really liked what Alexis said about the circular economy. We haven't said anything about a very important sector of the green economy, the bioeconomics. And we are living in the world of COVID-19. And without this bioeconomic center, we're not going to survive, because this is where they get the pharmaceuticals from, for example. So I think it makes sense to expand. I am almost the last speaker today. And we have to understand that the green economy is the whole economy. It's everything. And the next comment I would like to say about Damian's presentation, he had a wonderful cartoon with those waves. And the point of it was that the traditional thinking is just wash your hands and everything's going to be all right. Well, my dear colleagues, 3 billion people in the world experience a shortage of water for their very primary needs. Who's talking about washing your hands with soap to fight COVID? And I think this water crisis is indeed closer to us than the climate crisis. And all of those migration problems where hundreds of millions of people have nothing to drink, that is going to be a tragedy. And coming back to your question, this issue of what do we do with economy has been present for about a year and a half or 2 years tops. Well, I've been an economist for 30 years. And when the whole world economy has promised to become carbon neutral by mid-century, that is a very absolutely new economic reality. So what does this mean? Logically, this means that humanity has to fit within 1.5 degrees. What do we do with GDP? What do we do with income? What do we do with employment? What do we do with new technology? And logically, so we have this very, very narrow corridor for the green economy, and we have to fit into it. And there is no clear understanding globally of what it is that we have to do. And I think the pressing issue is how to measure the transition to green economy. There is a great saying among economists: you can't manage something you can't measure. And today we keep coming back to the GDP measurement. That is not a good measurement. My favorite book that I recommend to my students is by 2 Nobel laureates. And that it's called Assessing Our Life Incorrectly by Stiglitz and Sen. How do we measure life? How do we assess development in these new conditions? I believe we don't have a clear understanding of that. And the classic problem, I think Alexis and Damian mentioned it. What do we do with consumption? And when we watched this speech by the president, I think it also was mentioned there. And the Living Planet Index, I believe Damian mentioned it. There is another wonderful measurement, the environmental footprint. Because humanity is we eat up the annual footprint by August. And if we want to maintain the average American lifestyle, we will need 5 planets. And how do we change the planet? And someone mentioned Greta Thunberg. And if we compare the carbon footprint of industry and the carbon footprint of consumption, we see a very interesting reality. Greta Thunberg is from Sweden. And Sweden emits very little greenhouse gas, but it brings in a lot of product with a huge carbon footprint. And this indicator is something like -60. Maybe Greta Thunberg should educate her government and her citizenship about changing the consumption model, because I think that the change of the consumption and production model goal, I think changing the consumption model is psychologically much more difficult than changing the production model. With production, it's pretty much clear, and Europe is a wonderful example. Europe is transitioning to low carbon technology. And this is something very important for Russia. For 3 years, we've been experiencing a technological revolution that is hardly ever mentioned. In 2019, Russia began implementing the concept of best available technology that's minimizing environmental impact. And I believe that this reform that we began in 2019 can have a great green impact, both in climate change and in biodiversity, everything that my colleagues mentioned. And we also haven't mentioned that a month ago, the Russian government adopted the strategy of transitioning towards a low carbon development. And this strategy will be in force until 2050. And for the first time, Russia has adopted a strategy that finishes in 2050. We'll see how it goes. But I think that there was a wonderful question. What is it? Because for about a year, we're talking about green economy. We're trying to understand what it is. And politicians have made their decisions. But from the point of view of traditional economy, there are lots of questions. So how do we fit into this 1.5 degree corridor? And I personally do not see any clear answers. Yes, new bonds, a financial restructuring. And speaking of green financing, there was this Englishman, Mark Carney. He was head of the British Bank, and he is a very famous businessman. And he mentioned calculations for the largest US and Japanese banks. And it turned out that the Bank of Japan was going to be sustainable when the air temperature grows by 3 degrees. And American financial projects are made with the 5 degree temperature rate in mind, and we have to fit within 1.5 degrees. So we aren't now calculating cost benefit ratios and all of those indicators. We're now talking about air temperature and this narrow corridor. This is the new reality and questions that we have to answer in the nearest future.
Thank you very much, Sergei Bobolov. Now in Paris, we have Guillaume Allard. I hope you can hear us.
Hi, Jean-Emmanuel. I can hear you very well. Well, or more likely your translator.
You've been with Paris Dauphine University and with this Green Economy Institute. Thank you for being with us today. My first question to you is this. What are the problems that we are facing now to reduce carbon emissions?
All right. So I will share my screen to give you to back up my words with a few slides, which will make it more lively. I hope you see my screen now. So basically, I will not go more. I will go fast on why we need to mitigate climate change. My climatologist colleagues have already done that very well. What I would like to point out is what does it mean to reach carbon neutrality? If I take worldwide CO2 emission, it gives something like this. You see in gray, this is everything we have emitted since the middle of the 19th century. And one pathway to reach carbon neutrality by the end of the century, something that would be consistent with remaining within the 2 degrees limit set by the Paris Agreement. I'm not even talking about the 1.5 degrees mentioned by Professor Babilov. This would be like a COVID every year in terms of emission reduction, meaning it's possible to do it. We have the technologies to do it. We have many knowledge. We have what it takes to do it, but it requires a massive effort across the board within everything in our society and in our economy. And if you think about industry, well, try to think in your way of life of an item, of anything in your way of life that did not come from an industrial plant. Almost nothing. I mean, the industry is at the basis of our modern lifestyles. And if we look at the sources of greenhouse gases, it looks like that, meaning it's mostly about the burning of fossil fuels, coal, oil, gas, as well as some chemical reaction in industrial processes. And if you take all the fossil fuels burnt by the industry to work, as well as the specific industrial processes, it's 1/3 of global emissions. Meaning if we want to reach carbon neutrality, one way or another, we need to cut emissions within the industry. So this is for the whole background of why it matters to decrease emission within the industry. Now, Jean-Emmanuel, you asked me what is the main challenge about it. Basically, it's because we are somewhat, in a way, addicted to fossil fuel for a very good reason. I mean, the Industrial Revolution started 2 centuries ago, first in England, and it spread across all over the world. And the energy that allowed us to achieve this industrialization were fossil fuels, first coal, then oil with gas. So meaning we could only do the Industrial Revolution and industrialize ourselves because we have a massive amount of energy available to us, fossil fuels. And meaning our whole economy has been organized around it, meaning getting out of it also make it very difficult because the use of fossil fuel is completely embedded at the foundation of our economy. There is a word in economics which I like about that. It's called the carbon lock-in. It means precisely this, how those fossil fuels are locked within our societies. And I mean, schematically, you have 3 aspects about it. The first one is think about all the infrastructure, the existing asset, the physical assets that are linked to fossil fuel. Here I'm talking about cars that are using gasoline and fuel. I'm talking about all the infrastructure to extract, transport, and refine those fossil fuel industries, but also about industrial processes that requires coal, gas, and oil, for example, to generate industrial heat. And in a way, getting out of fossil fuel will mean, in a way, we'll have to replace all this existing infrastructure. The second aspect is technology. Since we have been using fossil fuel for like 2 centuries, and we have been using them a lot, I mean, it represents 2/3 of our energy, primary energy consumption. That means we have also improved, we have perfected to the highest level how we extract them, how we refine them, and how much we can use from them. So in a way, to be a bit provocative, I could say that the fossil fuel has something like more than a century of technological advance against other energies like electricity or so on. I mean, again, it depends on which sector we're talking about, but in many applications, like for example, transport or industrial processes, fossil fuel has this technological advance, meaning it has a massive competitive edge against other kinds of energy, such as renewable, for example. And the last part touches us at our very core, at our very way we live as individuals. It's about the usages. And to illustrate it, I will go through a very simple example, which is the individual car. I mean, if you use a car that is powered by gasoline, a thermic car, the kind we use every day, you can easily go, you can easily do around 1,000 kilometers before you need to refill it. If you use an electric car, the autonomy, the distance you can do before refilling it is much lower. I mean, if we improve technology at best, we can do 200, 300 kilometers. Meaning if we go through, for example, through electric vehicle, on top of all the industrial and technological changes it implies, it will need one way or the other hand, some changes in our way of life. I'm not saying it will be better or worse. It means we will need to change. And generally, we don't like to change so much. And all the three aspects are reinforcing each other, which means if we want to get out of fossil fuel, if we want to decrease our emission by that way, we'll need to tackle all of them at the same time. So this is here the main challenge when it comes to decarbonizing the industry.
Конкретно, что мы можем делать, чтобы идти?
Specifically, what can we do to move faster?
Okay, so in a way, we need to go through all aspects of this carbon locking. First, we need to invest in technologies. We have candidate technologies to replace existing ones. For example, we can do the so-called carbon capture and storage, meaning we suck up CO2 from the plant and send it under the ground. It requires specific investment. It's on top of existing infrastructures. We can use hydrogen, especially in the chemical industry, or as a way to store energy in a liquid and gaseous form. But for this, we need to be able to produce this hydrogen without producing CO2, and we need to improve the existing technology. We can electrify the industry, meaning, for example, replacing fossil fuel to produce heat. It's very good to produce low temperature heat, like 100, 200 degrees, not to produce 1,000 degrees. And it will require lots and lots of electricity. And then finally, we can do a lot to improve energy consumption, to circularize our economy in order to decrease new extraction and the related carbon emissions. But if you improve too much your processes, like you spend less in terms of resources, energy to produce one unit, if you're in industry, it may result in more volume, meaning you need to be careful not to offset what you gain with more volumes. So this is it for the technology. So we need to invest in those technology with R&D. And then you have the issue of investment. I mean, today, if we want to get to net zero emission in the industry, it's 400 billion per year, which, to give you what it represents a quarter of total manufacturing investment, I mean, per year. So it's massive. And besides, we need to be careful because once you build a plant with a given technology, it's here on the long run. It's here for 20, 30, 40 years, meaning we need to make sure to catch the windows of opportunity every time you have a new cycle of investment in the industry. And then you have the question, it's one thing to invest, but what should we do with the remaining infrastructures, the remaining old plants, the one that still relies on fossil fuels? They may end up being stranded, meaning we may have to retire them early with the corresponding cost for companies that own them, especially if we start to have governments implementing regulations or carbon pricing or adjustments, as Europe wants to do, for example. And so let me give you a case in point. It is still making industry. It has two ways of getting out of the traditional blast furnace technology, which basically use coal and iron ore. The first one is to use scrap steel and remelt it using electricity. The second one is actually producing steel directly with iron ore and hydrogens. Those technology, especially the hydrogen steel making, is very new. It's still nascent. It still has to be developed. Besides, the costs are higher, 50% more, meaning the plants using this technology will be less competitive against the ones that are using traditional blast furnace. And it's especially important in a field like steel, which is very, very competitive. If you have cost increase, you cannot pass them to the customers because your competitors, if they use a cheaper technology, will outcompete you. So what can you do around that? I mean, this way you will, at some point, will need some kind of a public support. And I think you have three aspects to it. The first one, we need like support when it's come to R&D in order to make up for the technological advantage of fossil fuel, like investing in developing all those new technologies, making them applicable. Then another way to help would be to provide support for new investment in those technologies. If you're an industrialist, because of those higher costs, because those technologies are less used, you don't have an incentive to invest in them. You don't have you have an incentive not to be the first one. But by providing public support, you can provide the right incentive to industrialists for them to become first movers in those new technologies. For example, in steel making, by give them an incentive to go first toward, for example, hydrogen-based steel making. And finally, once those technologies start to become more mainstream, it's important to develop standards, because this is how the industry works. Because of investment in industries are very expensive and they have for the long terms, companies tend to prefer well-tested methods, well-tested technologies. So you need to make sure that standards emerge, that best practices are shared, so that all those new technologies related to low carbon economy can spread across the whole industrial sectors. I cannot hear you.
You hear me? So вы нам слушаете? Спасибо большое за...
Thanks a lot for your presentation.
Вечером в Москве.
It's 10 p.m. here in Moscow. I think we did a good job discussing the topic of our today's meeting. It's time to wrap up. And here in the room, we have Alexander Dolganov, Deputy Chairman of the Board of this Center Invest Bank. Please share your opinion about what you just heard. You can come over here to the front.
Вспомнить, господин Афата вспомнил про форум «Позитивная экономика».
Here we mentioned the Positive Economy Forum in 2015. It was organized. Now we have daily events on ESG, sustainable development, and things like that. But in 2015, a sustainable development event and a positive economy, particularly in the city of Rostov-on-Don, this was something special. As a bank, as the largest regional bank in the south of Russia, we were happy to welcome that and host that event in our region. Among Russia's financial institutions, we are among leaders in ESG and sustainable development. We started earlier than any other bank in Russia. From the early noughties, we raised investments from BRD, IFC, and lots of other development institutions. We worked with almost all international development banks that had some limits for Russia. And this work with the development institutions and their sustainable financing and using EBRD, we attracted 17 billion to finance energy efficiency and issue loans to SMEs and agriculture, we issued loans to green projects starting from 2005, 2006. The development institutions helped us not just with financing, but with competences. The access to their best practices allowed us not only to do financial engineering of those projects, but technical engineering was possible too. Bankers did not have that kind of mentality, but it was an important factor. For example, how your energy efficiency project that you financed would really reduce the consumption of thermal and electrical resources, how to recalculate it into equivalent of CO2 emissions. And this was not something that the Russian bankers did in the early 2000s. And thanks to that, and we already had our green portfolios formed. We had experience calculating the reduction of emissions of carbon equivalents. Thanks to that, we were the first issuers of green bonds in this segment of sustainable development. Timur spoke about Russia, but I mean about Moscow, but in reality, our bank was the first issuer of green bonds, something that we did in 2019. This was a real breakthrough for us and the market. That issue was successfully closed, and we already reported on the environmental impact of that. And we offered that not just to corporate investors, but to private ones. It was important for us early in 2019 to attract private investors for them to try these sustainable instruments that previously had not been available in Russia, considering the fact that it's rather late here in Moscow. Let me add one more example of what we did. We analyzed how we actually operated our performance and the performance of our clients using the UN Sustainable Development Goals as a system coordinates. And we didn't just use Russian or international accounting systems, and we took a look at our clients, our borrowers, and through that prism, and we got this first model of banks ESG mix or balance. This is how we visualize this project. Let me use this opportunity to present this to our partners from AIF for them to have this innovative and at the same time practical result. Thanks a lot. All right. We need to wrap it up, but it's an open mic now. If you want to share your opinion on today's discussion, please do so, distinguished experts. I have a question. A lot has been said about this transition to green economy, and Guillaume said how most of emissions come from power segment. In Russia, by the way, we have quite a few renewables. We have wind parks in Ulyanovsk, Astrakhan, Rostov, and Stavropol. Nevertheless, this energy will have to be stored somehow. The greatest problem of today's power transition is how you store electricity. Dear experts, what if we try to get to this carbon neutrality, but then we will use up something else? Lithium, for example, it's really hazardous for the environment as well. We will get carbon neutrality, but then we will pollute the environment with something else, which will be even more expensive. What if this race will be meaningless if we pollute the environment with something else? Who are you asking? We don't have experts in the power industry. They are trying to replace lithium by some nuclear batteries or something else, and other options of energy storage are being considered. That's an important matter. It's discussed at every energy forum. We don't see the results yet, but many scientists and engineers work on that. And believe me, as a journalist, I took part in many debates on that. The wind parks are being built, the photovoltaic stations are still there, but that's not purely sustainable. It depends on the wind and the sun. But still, a lot of scientific efforts are being made there. Good evening. I have a question. Thank you for your presentations. It was really interesting. I have a question to you, actually. There's this about these indices of green companies that you can invest in. And there are companies that are considered to be green, but that includes Apple, Google, and companies like that, huge corporations that are doing fine anyway. They are added into those rankings by the amount of their carbon footprint or how much coal they use. It's obvious that Google doesn't use that much coal in the activity, but here's my question. Do you think that such criteria are right and correct? And maybe it's a conspiracy of Google and Apple that forfeit all those indices and attract money doing that. Alexander, as a pioneer in the Russian market, it's a typical question that you get a lot. The best that you can do is to invest into our bank. There'll be no greenwashing. It will be honest with annual report to all stakeholders on every kopeck that we spent. The best that you can do is to invest into your country's economy and our center invest bank in the south of Russia, in education and family also. Anyone else? Any comments or questions? All right. Let's sum up then. This was a great event, a very touching event. This was the first event like that we organized. There'll be another one at the end of January. And thank you for your attention, for staying up so late to listen to our speakers. I'd like to thank all our speakers who expressed their points of view. I want to thank the French Business School and our audience online, and see you real soon. In conclusion, let me just say that the green agenda and climate are the kind of topics that knows no borders. One of the speakers has shown us this cartoon that we have no planet B, and we realize that, and that can unite the entire humanity when we all feel that we are just one huge human body that lives on this planet Earth, which has a huge responsibility for all other creatures living on the planet. Otherwise, we will not survive. This is the agenda that will force us get back to those issues, analyze them, and this is how we should be dealing with that. Scientists start the process, and then followed by economists, entrepreneurs, and politicians, and then we'll get to some great results. Thank you very much indeed.